Good evening and welcome to the Digital Liberation Front. Tonight we have a very special guest with us. All our guests are special, but this one is extremely special because he's going to help us get to the bottom of some of the questions about this COVID-19 vaccine that's being distributed right now. And as a matter of fact, there's multiple vaccines and things that are in the works, but tonight Dr. Dylan Burdette is going to be giving us an inside view on a variety of levels about the efforts to distribute this vaccine, the making of this vaccine, and hopefully some of the socio-political implications too. I kind of want to touch on that. But to help me tonight, Andy Kennedy is by my side running tech, and Carrie Barber is online looking at and supervising the various chat rooms on YouTube, Facebook. We are doing this live via Zoom, and we want to get your questions. We have questions ourselves, understandably, but we want to get your questions. So head to Digital Liberation Front Live on Facebook. You can comment there if you're on Facebook, but you can also comment on YouTube, Twitter. We're here to talk. So Dylan, welcome tonight, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into this business of saving the world from pandemics.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me on. My name is Dr. Dylan Burdette. I have a PhD. My PhD is in molecular biology and biochemistry. As part of my research, I've done a fair amount of publication in virology. Right now, I'm actually, I do the design and research and development of therapeutics. That includes several COVID therapeutics that I'm currently involved with. In addition to that, I've done a fair amount of scientific activism in my day. In my experience, I've testified before the United States House and the United States Senate on behalf of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Actually, just last week, I testified alongside of Warehouse Workers for Justice and the Chicago Workers Collaborative as we made the case that frontline and essential workers need to be further up ahead in the line to receive this vaccine because they're some of the workers that are most affected. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm coming from. So let's get into it.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting. I'm happy that you start off with the frontline worker angle because that's what I really wanted to focus on. This thing is rolling out. It's not tested. I'm not here to reinforce any false narratives. We're here to debunk things. But yeah, it has been tested, widely, correct?
I am going to push back on that right away. So the Pfizer vaccine, the one that is actually being rolled out here in my state in Illinois yesterday and today, the first healthcare workers were being immunized. Before that was actually put out into the wider public, it was tested. The final trial of it was 40,000 plus people. So it was tested on over 40,000 people. Now that was split into two arms. So essentially half of them got the vaccine, half of them received a placebo. That was to make sure that there were no negative effects. So over 20,000 people have already received the vaccine and have been through the process of clinical trials. So it has been tested kind of extensively. The passed and started distributing next is from Moderna. That its phase 3 clinical trials involved 30,000 people. So this is at this point, there's 70,000 people that have received the vaccine. So to say that it hasn't been tested or that we, the public at large, are guinea pigs in this is not a correct thing to say.
Gotcha. I mean, and that's good too. And I'm going to play that. I'm going to play the everyman because these are the things that I'm hearing that basically our audience is worried about. They're concerned about. So it has been tested widely. What are some of the side effects? I know you talked about the Pfizer vaccine. What are some of the side effects of the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, if you know?
Yeah. So. The most common side effects are the types of side effects that you'd see from a typical vaccine, right? So that is soreness at the injection site, fatigue, fevers, a feeling of under the weather for a few days. Those are the most common side effects. In the Pfizer vaccine, it was not picked up in the wide clinical trials, but in the first few days of injections in the UK, they saw some allergic reactions in people that were already prone to anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock. These are the type of people that have to carry EpiPens with them. Though it didn't result in any deaths, but because of that, regulators have said if the vaccine is going to be distributed, the location where it is distributed should have facilities that can deal with anaphylactic shock or anaphylaxis. But those are kind of vanishingly rare. We saw 2 examples of it in the UK, and as of now, I'm not aware of any other extreme side effects that have been seen.
Okay. So as far as deploying this or rolling this out, how are we prioritizing, what states, what institutions? I know I'm here in North Carolina, and Duke received, a bunch of, I guess, like a bunch of the vaccine modules, I guess. So, how are we determining, who gets it and when?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the federal response, so kind of over and over and over since we first picked up the coronavirus in the United States, it's kind of been a series of bad decisions and failures on behalf of our government, right? So there is some concern about how this vaccine will be distributed. Will certain states be excluded the same way we saw with ventilators and PPE in the early stages of the pandemic? Mm-hmm. And we don't know if that is going to happen, right? Given what we've seen from the federal government time after time after time, I kind of continue to hope for the best, but at the same time, I prepare and fear for the worst, because it seems like our governmental officials, especially at the federal level, have been screwing this up every chance they get. So that's that. As far as actually distributing the vaccine once it actually gets to where it needs to go, right? There is an order, and this order is for middle and working class people. The rich and politically connected are probably going to be the very first ones to get it. All of these people, the politicians especially that spent more worry about, are going to be obviously the first ones in line to get the vaccine. But for the rest of us, for the vast majority of people, of working people in the United States, here's how it's going to go. It's going to go healthcare providers, right? So that's hospital workers, nurses, doctors, things like that. Then we're going to go to senior citizens in nursing homes, followed by first responders. That's EMTs, firefighters, policemen. Then going to at-risk populations. Those are people that are immunocompromised, people with advanced diabetes, asthma, COPD, things like that, things that make them more prone to die of coronavirus if they get it. At that point, we'll then go to the elderly who are not living in nursing homes, followed by essential and frontline workers, then teachers, then the unhoused, then prisoners, then young adults, and then children under 18, if there's approval for it by then, and then to the general public.
Okay. We do have our first question. David Gutowski says, did the testing include women and children? Was it a wide spectrum of the public?
So it did include women. The testing has included women. Children, yes, but not enough for it to be approved for wide distribution at this point. The clinical trials in children are still continuing, which is why I said, when it comes to children, if it's approved at that point, then it will go to children. So they're currently conducting clinical trials on children in smaller scale at this point. But yeah, so it is currently being trialed on children. It was tested on women. Yes.
So how soon will it be available, for children? How long is that trial supposed to last?
Well, I mean, it could be a few months, but honestly, the vaccination timetables at this point, it looks like the vast majority of us won't get it until next spring or summer anyway. So given how quickly the clinical trials were undertaken and finished, we could probably be looking at the general public and children being able to get it around the same time, probably next spring or summer.
Okay. So
Brandon, do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Go ahead, do it, Andy. You here too?
Okay. My question is this. My wife is a healthcare professional up in Canada, and she has, I guess, a friend that was part of the clinical trial here in our country. And of course, when she signed up, she was accepted. They did they don't know if they're going to be getting a placebo or an actual vaccine.
Yes.
They don't tell them. And so this person got the shot. And then I think it was a month later, they had to go back and get the second shot, right?
Yes.
She experienced absolutely no symptoms, no side effects of any kind after the first one. She assumed that she'd gotten the placebo, I guess. Anyway, she went for a second shot, and almost immediately her temperature spiked. She had these awful symptoms. She was basically sleeping, and it lasted for about 48 hours. From what I understand is that's common in 30% of people.
Yes.
I just wondered if you could explain why that is.
So it's essentially, this is what we call a minor side effect. What it is it's your body's immune system mounting an attack, right? It's essentially the same thing that would happen if you got a very severe case of the flu, right? You get very tired, you get a fever, you get fatigued, you just got to go lay down for a bit, right? This is your body's immune system mounting an attack, mounting a response to this. Now, what we do know is that generally side effects are more extreme in the second dose from both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. So if placebo, then that's not surprising. If she is in the placebo, it could simply be a reaction to another ingredient, not the active substance, but another ingredient in the vaccine. But yeah, that type of tiredness and fatigue is kind of widely reported as one of the side effects. But it's also a side effect of a lot of vaccines, honestly.
Okay, so the second shot, the one that generates the side effects, is that because it's an accumulation of both shots, or is the second shot stronger?
So what happens is the first time your body is exposed to an antigen, either through what we call a legacy vaccine or through this new generation mRNA vaccine, the first time what happens is your body mounts an immune response and creates what's called immune memory, right? Then when you go back for a booster, that second shot, your body is tested again, and it strengthens that immune response, right? So the first time you get a smaller immune response. The second time, since your body is already primed to fight this, you get a stronger immune response. So that when you are actually encounter the virus, your body has that immune response ready and it can fight it off.
I see. Okay. So it's more of your body's ready to wage war, and the side effect is you feel crappy for 2 days.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much.
We have another question. Carrie is actually asking, what is an RNA vaccine and how is it different? And does it change the DNA?
Oh, okay. This is actually a really great question. And so first off, Carrie, I'd like to say it's important that we note that this is an mRNA vaccine, right? RNA comes in several different varieties. mRNA is short for messenger RNA. And so it's important to note that that's what we're dealing with is messenger RNA. So let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about how vaccines work. Vaccines introduce what's called an antigen, which is a foreign substance. Can be basically anything. What they do is they introduce a small dose of that and they let the body attack it. That generates an immune response. And the most important thing is not only that it generates that immune response, but it generates what's called immune memory. Okay. When the body's then exposed to the antigen in the future, it already has the memory of that antigen, and it can mount a large immune response very quickly and effectively. And the most important thing is when you are mounting an immune response from your immune memory, you don't have nearly as much inflammation and cytotoxicity, right? So especially when we're talking about COVID, one of the things that, a lot of people were talking about when the pandemic first started spreading was the cytokine storm, right?
Mhm.
Which induces high amounts of cytotoxicity, which means your cells start to die off, your organs start to shut down, all of these types of things. You don't get that when you have an immune response mounted from memory cells, right? You get that when you have an immune response mounted from naive cells. So that's how a vaccine works, right? Now, in a legacy type vaccine, this antigen that you present the body with is either a part of a bacteria or a virus, which is generated by either heating or structurally damaging the bacteria or virus in some way that it falls to pieces, it's no longer infectious, and then that is given to the person so that they can generate that immune response, right?
Yeah.
Or it's a weakened version. So it's a strain of the virus or bacteria that's not really infective, but it's similar enough to the infective strain that it allows the body to learn that immune response and be able to fight it off. Now, in an mRNA vaccine, and this is very cool, an mRNA vaccine uses a small portion of the genetic material of that virus. So in the case of the COVID vaccines, what they're using is they're using a small amount of messenger RNA that encodes a portion of the outside of the coronavirus, right? Now, the coronavirus is called the coronavirus because it's got these little spikes all over it, right? That look kind of like a crown when you look at it through an electron microscope. That's how it got its name. So actually what the mRNA vaccines code for is that spike protein, that little spike. And so what happens is this mRNA goes into our cells and uses the cell's own machinery to manufacture that spike protein, which is then released out of the cell into the bloodstream, where it can be recognized and responded to by the immune cells. So there's no chance of a vaccine-induced infection, right? Because you're not putting either a part of the virus or a attenuated virus, anything like that. All you're doing is introducing just a bit of the RNA as a spike protein. Now, why is this important that we say that it's messenger RNA? Because messenger RNA is a type of RNA that has a half-life within the body of about 24 hours, right? That's it.
Okay.
Messenger RNA is used within our cells. So we have our DNA, right? When we need to make something for our cells, a little bit of the DNA unwinds, messenger RNA hooks up to that DNA and then moves out of the nucleus and out to the ribosomes where it can produce that protein, right? So this already exists in our cells, and because of the nature of how our cells encode things, messenger RNA can only exist within our cells for about 24 hours or so. It cannot go into our genome and change our DNA. It's just impossible for it to do that. We have evolved this system. It doesn't work in reverse, right? It only works to go in one direction. So it's a one-way system.
So RNA and mRNA and DNA are two very distinctly different things. DNA is a permanent thing, where the mRNA is something that's temporarily. These are temporary suggestions, instructions, temporary operational instructions, if you will.
Yeah. And how this works within the body, within our normal cellular development and our normal life cycle, is that it works is once that mRNA is created, then the cell has a mechanism for destroying the mRNA because we only need a certain amount of that protein, right? So because this is for an mRNA, once that protein is made, the cell then goes back and destroys that messenger RNA, so it cannot possibly make anything else, right? It breaks it down into individual molecules. It's incredibly safe and incredibly a well-regulated system.
24 hours, can't take over your body. You're back to normal, and your virus portfolio is hopefully updated to address the real virus when it does show up.
Exactly.
Dealt with the facsimile of the virus. Got you. Question from the internet. Once the healthcare professionals obtain the vaccine shot, do you know if they're going to stop using PPE at the current standard? What is that transition away with masks? and such look like? And then also, and I want to kind of fold herd immunity into this too. Like, are we ever going to be able to get away from masks, for the foreseeable future? Are we going to see more issues like this in regard to not just this virus, but other viruses due to the increase of issues from global warming and whatnot?
Yeah. Well, so to kind of address your final question first, we scientists have been warning for over a decade now that given what we know about global warming and also about the increased connectivity of our world, yes, we are probably going to be looking at more pandemics happening in the near future. Given that we're due to global climate change and climate disaster, there's going to be more mass migrations. And especially more mass migrations of poorer populations that are neglected by our government, vulnerable populations at the edge that our government prefer, or that governments, not just our government, governments overall prefer to ignore. It's very possible that we're going to be seeing more pandemics. Given that if somebody does get sick, the majority of people around that sick person will be vaccinated, therefore they cannot spread the virus, right? So we attain herd immunity, right? Now, how does this relate back to masks, right? So the question, the question that you were asking is, if once healthcare providers are vaccinated, will they stop wearing masks? Or once we all get vaccinated, can we stop wearing masks? And the answer is not for a while. And I want to explain why that is, right? So first off, if you got the first dose of your vaccine tomorrow, you would not be immune for 3 months minimum, right? Because you got to get your first dose. Month later, you get your second dose. Month later, that's when you're theoretically immune, right? So even if you got your first dose tomorrow, you could still theoretically catch and spread the virus for up to 3 months, right? Now, on top of that, in every single population, with every single vaccine, there are some people who are going to be allergic to the vaccine, right? Mm-hmm. Their immune system, rather than taking that information and building an immune response, are just going to have an allergic reaction. They're not going to be able to build an immune response, right? There are also going to be some people whose immune systems react well, but they don't retain the memory, right? So it's going to look like they got vaccinated, but for some reason or another, because of every person's individual immune system, they're just not going to be immune, right? And then there are people that are just medically unable to be vaccinated, right? That's just the truth of how vaccines work, right? So until we achieve that 70% threshold, those people will continue to be at risk. And here's the kicker: we cannot know who those people are, right? We won't know who those people are until they get sick, right? So that's why even if most people are vaccinated, until we can safely get to that 70% number, there's still the possibility of community spread. Now, here's the other thing, right? The vaccine will fight off infection, right? Mm-hmm. If you get exposed to the virus, the vaccine will defeat the virus. However, theoretically, right, you could have a few cells that get infected with the virus that allow you to, shed a little bit of the virus. You don't get sick. You don't really, your whole body doesn't get infected, but you might get a little bit of infection, like in your nose or your mouth, and then the vaccine kills it off. However, you could unwittingly spread small numbers of this virus, right? Mm-hmm. If you do that, and the person or people that you are around aren't vaccinated, they could get sick, right? Mm-hmm. So once again, until community spread is stopped, until a herd immunity is achieved, as if there is no virus. However, right, this is not only attainable through vaccine, right? This is currently done in Australia and New Zealand. They've stopped community spread. They had no vaccine. They stopped. All right. We decided that Bezos needed to have $1 trillion, so we need that vaccine. Mm-hmm. Australia and New Zealand decided, let's listen to the scientists the first time around. They've stopped. Spread is stopped even if you get a vaccine, it's still not going to be completely safe for everybody. You'll be safe, probably, but it's not going to be safe for everybody until we are able to stop community spread, right? And we get that through a combination of social behaviors and vaccines, right?
Social distancing, wearing your mask, limiting your travel, not visiting people, for the holidays, for big get-togethers. This is the path toward not wearing a mask anymore.
Yes. And it's a path toward not wearing the mask anymore, whether you get the vaccine or not.
Okay. All right. Carrie, Darnell Williams had a question, and I'm sure whether we're bringing him on to ask it or what there he goes. I see him. Darnell, welcome to the show. Ask your question, brother. You're muted. Let me see if I can unmute him.
I got it.
All right, easier.
I got it. All right, my first question is, you said it got to be 3 shots, right? So you can only take your shots once a month. So what you're really saying is, after we start taking the process of taking those shots, we should stay away from somebody for 90 days. And my second question is, let's say about other vaccines, the mixing of vaccines. Let's say you started your trial for taking your vaccine, and then they want to give you a flu shot. Does that mix well? And how do I, you know what I mean? Like, have they checked that? The mixing of vaccines. And should I wait? If I'm starting the process, should I wait? I'm starting it, and it's going to take 90 days, which is 3 months. I should stay away from everybody until those 90 days is up.
So you should behave as if you're not vaccinated until those 90 days are up, right? Whether that means stay away from everybody or whether that means just keep wearing your mask.
Yes.
The other thing is, right, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are a 2-shot process. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is currently in the pipeline, it's currently in, I believe, phase 2 clinical trials, is a 1-shot, right? It's not a multi-dose. It's a 1-shot. And I believe there is a vaccine coming out from a company called Novavax that I can't remember if it's a 2-shot or a 1-shot off the top of my head. One-shot vaccine that's in the pipeline. So yes, but the way that these vaccines have been tested is they do the first shot, wait approximately 30 days, do the second shot, and then after 30 days, the person has a full mounted immune response. Whether or not within that 30 days, there might be some wiggle room, but that's when the full immune response is verified, right? So it could be if your immune system is really good or your immune system is a certain way, after 7 days of that second shot, you have immunity. But for safety, yeah, they say wait 30 days after the second shot. I'm sorry, what was your second question?
My second question is about mixing vaccines.
Yes.
How do we go about mixing these vaccines? Has that been tested properly?
So as far as I know, like giving a combined vaccine has not been tested with these vaccines, right? Now, that by that, I mean, like, you know how you can go in and get your MMR vaccine, which is measles, mumps, rubella, 1 shot, bam. So as far as I know, these vaccines have not been tested as combined vaccines. However, I would say you should still take your flu vaccine if you don't have access to the COVID vaccine right now. And I would assume that there should be about a 30-day spacing in between vaccines if you're not going to be mixing vaccines. But that I don't know. I don't know for sure how these vaccines mix with other vaccines, but just knowing what I know about vaccines in general, generally you want to wait at least a month or 2 between vaccines. But I couldn't say for sure about these COVID ones. I don't think that's been tested.
So 3 months, pretty much you're at home without a paycheck.
Well, no, 3 months, you're just behaving like you are normally. Yeah, if you have no paycheck at the beginning of those 3 months, yeah, you're not going to have a paycheck by the end. But yeah, no, for 3 months, you are building that immunity, right? For a lot of us, you know, a lot of people have been working from home. You know, a lot of people have lost their jobs, and then a lot of us still have had to go to work. You know, and so for us, once we start getting those vaccines, we're just going to keep our mask on, and we're going to continue to go to work, because we don't have a choice. You know, like I said, our government early on decided that Bezos needed $1 trillion, so we were going to have to go to work, or we were going to lose our jobs, and a lot of people lost their jobs. But because of that, when this vaccine comes around, we're going to have to keep working, and that's going to suck, especially because, you know, it didn't have to be this way, but that's what our government chose. So that's where we are now.
Okay, I have a question for you again, Dylan.
Yes.
Do you think it would have been a good idea for the government to step in and stop people from watching the movie I Am Legend for the last 6 months?
I mean, that wasn't a very good movie in the first place. So
it wasn't the feel-good movie of the year, that's for sure.
I mean, there's a valid concern. I mean, you can finish your point, Andy. But
that's my point, Brandon. Thank you. That's my point. Is that there is obviously, and you knew we were going to get into this at some point. Mm-hmm. You know, the conspiracy theories, quote unquote, and the fear, and you know, the Microsoft is going to stick a chip in you and monitor you and program you to buy more things from Bezos. And just let's dispel as many of those as we can, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the chip, right? For an RFID chip to be implanted in you, right? Just given the technological limits of electromagnetic radiation, an RFID chip has to be a minimum of 1/4 inch across in order to be recognized by an RFID reader. Now,
that's a hell of a needle. That's a hell of a big needle.
If you can imagine a needle 1/4 inch wide, if you see that coming for you, you probably got bigger problems.
You better be saying,
yeah. So it's just like physically, it's impossible to inject an RFID chip with a normal vaccination needle. Okay, let's see what other fun. Give me some other conspiracy theories, and we'll try to do this rapid fire.
I Am Legend, you know, viral mutation. You know,
viral mutation. This is what we talked about with mRNA. It's physically, and I don't say physically lightly, right? My PhD is in molecular biology. For 4 years of my life, I spent in a lab introducing mutations into DNA, and looking at the RNA and the proteins that these mutations produced, right? It is physically impossible for the mRNA vaccine to get into your DNA and change you. Okay. So I can just shoot that down right now.
What about mutation of the virus itself? You know, as we inoculate ourselves against one version, is there a chance of it, you know, turning into something else and reacting, you know, to some way adapting and saying, you know.
Okay, so this is why vaccination is so important. There is something that can happen with viruses called, or really any infectious agent, called carrier-mediated mutagenesis, right? What that means is as you get infected, as this stuff reproduces inside of you, it can get changed, right? So the more we can curb community spread, the less chance there is of that happening, right? Now, the reason the spike proteins were targeted for the vaccine is because what we know about the coronavirus is that it mutates very rapidly, right? It just does. That's a feature of coronavirus. That's why it's such a successful virus, okay? So it's important to stop that spread as much as possible, right? So like I said, even after the vaccine starts going, keep your mask on until we can stop community spread, because there's always the chance of that. However, What we do know about coronavirus is that spike protein is not as variable as the rest of the virus, right? Because it needs that spike protein in order to infect cells. In order to get into cells to spread itself, it needs that spike protein to be able to interact with the acetylcholine receptors, or the ACE2 receptors on the surface of our cells, right?
It's a fixed characteristic.
Yeah, it needs it in order for it to do it, to be a successful virus, in order to infect cells, that protein has to be conserved. That's why it's being targeted by the vaccine, right? So we basically looked across all strains of coronavirus and said that spike protein is the one thing that's constant across all strains of coronavirus. Let's make a vaccine to that.
My question.
Yes.
I'm actually thrilled that was the case, because I remember back one of our very first interviews with you, you were talking about that as a potential for a way to attack it. And I think it's really cool that it's all come full circle, and that's eventually how we're going to defeat it.
Well, I mean, every once in a while science does things.
So what's up? Darnell had a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's get the elephant in the room. I'm a real big fat guy. And just like, the day after pill, it tells you after 275, the pill might not work. So let's talk about these vaccines. America is a fat America. So do we got to get a stronger dose because of our size? Or how do they go about that? That's a question I know a lot of heavy people want to know. And
that's a very good question. That is one of the advantages of the mRNA vaccine versus a conventional vaccine, because what the mRNA does is it actually has your body produce the antigen response to, right?
Okay.
Rather than injecting a fixed amount of the drug into you, right? What it does is it goes into your body and produces it. So it's actually built in you. Now, the obesity is a point I wanted to make. When we talk about who gets the vaccine, known to be at a higher risk for this virus. So they can actually get in line to get the vaccine before other people. So,
wow.
It may be that if that immune response does not form correctly or not strong enough, that by the time the general public comes around and is starting to get that vaccine, it might be that larger people need to get a second booster or a third booster or something. But that is something I believe they did account for that in the clinical trials, and I believe that obese people were included in those clinical trials, but I'd have to go back and double check.
I don't know no obese people. I just know fat people.
Well, I mean, I guess that's good. It's like, if I've been, eating for a good majority of my life, I've trained for this moment. This is my time.
Right. That's right.
I won the Olympics.
Where's my medal? So the M deactivates after 24 hours. Our viral profile updates for us to be able to address it. Is that indefinite? Does it wear off? Because I was hearing something about it wears off after 3 months and you need to go and get it again. Like, how does this work?
Yeah, so the 3-month figure is because that's as long as we have as far as information goes, right? The clinical trials have been going on for 3 months. That's information goes, right? The clinical trials have been going on for 3 months. That people are still immune after 3 months.
So there's a possibility that the clinical trials that have been going on for 6 months, when the first people get the 3 months, and they'll know it's still effective because they're at that point.
Exactly. And I'm assuming that the companies are going to continue to monitor the patients that are in all phases of the clinical trials. One of the things that I have heard a lot of conspiracy theorists espouse is, what about long-term effects? What about long-term effects? What about long-term effects? You can't release this until you know about the long-term effects. But the participants in those clinical trials are going to continue to be monitored for months, if not years, by these companies to kind of be a canary in the coal mine, if you will. Okay.
So if they're going to become a zombie in month 5, we'll at least have heads up, about who needs to be shot first. I got you. So how can the government do a better job of explaining this, Dylan? Because there's a lot of people who are, there's a lot of disinformation out there. Everything is about branding now. How can we get this information out in a better format?
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, given every chance, our government has really messed up at every step along the way in this coronavirus response. At this point, it's hard for people to trust the government. It's easier for people it's easier for people like me to trust science. However, when people see the government and science as one and the same, people don't listen, right? And honestly, I was kind of, I've been, Dr. Fauci has had, kind of a really hard role in this time. However, I feel that one of the stumbles, even by Dr. Fauci, was accepting the position as Biden's coronavirus advisor, right? Because one of the things that everyone remembers about Dr. Fauci is him coming out and saying that masks are not effective to stem the spread of coronavirus, right? He said it. And he said it because he was trying to preserve PPE for people in hospitals, but he still said it. Mm-hmm. And at this point, he's accepted the role under Biden's administration, but I don't think that was the best decision. I think that someone else should be coming up and saying, take this vaccine, because, because we've seen him, right? We've seen what he said. We know what he said. We know what he did. Same thing with the Surgeon General, there needs to be new leadership, right? Whether that new leadership is in who's going to be actually addressing the public, whether that new leadership is the new administration that's coming in January 21st. But, it's going to be important for somebody else, somebody who has not been addressing the public, to start addressing the public. Because at this point, everybody is fed up, and they're fed up with reason, because our government, lied to us. Our government decided that Jeff Bezos needed to be a trillionaire. More than 300,000 of us needed to be alive. Our government decided that they could make us go to work, but somehow try to keep us from seeing each other outside of work. These are all very, very bad decisions that were made at a federal level, right? And, the Trump administration has been an anti-science administration from day one, and they've done a damn good job of destroying scientific credibility in the 4 years that they have been in office. And it's going to take decades, years, if not decades, for scientific credibility within the United States to be reasserted. And it is disgusting, and it is angering, and it means that so many people will die, even more than have died already. And it is a failure on every level imaginable. And I don't know what can be done in order to restore the faith in the science, in scientists, and in the government, and in the government's medical practices moving forward. But it's going to take a hell of a lot.
Well, Carrie has a question. And I hear all that, and I totally feel your anger, and I share it. but she has a question. By the time those canaries, we were talking about, the individuals, who may show some detrimental side effects or whatever. By the time those canaries show up, how many people, will have received the
vaccine?
The vaccine.
Yeah. So the important thing to note is that even though the phase 3 clinical trials concluded kind of very recently, we can go back even longer than that. We can go back to phase 2, phase 1 clinical trials. So the honest thing is that this virus is relatively new. Like, it's less than a year old in humans, right? So a year, right? A year is like best case scenario, what we know, right? Okay. Now, this comes back to, what we know about, or what we don't know about chronic effects of COVID-19 infection, right? We don't know. We have clinical reports of people not being able to smell or taste for up to 6 months. We don't know, after a year, are they going to be able to smell and taste again? We have people who have been unable to breathe for 9 months without oxygen. Is one of the chronic effects going to be that they are never able to breathe without oxygen? We don't know. This disease and the medicines to treat it are so new that we don't know. We don't know about chronic effects. We don't know about chronic vaccine effects. But the thing is, especially when we talk about vaccines and drugs and treatments, that's not something that we traditionally look at, because if we find a drug, like, this is not just talking about the coronavirus vaccine, but this is talking about how drugs are treated in general. If we find a drug that has positive clinical effects, we will try to get that released unless we see some red flags about possible long-term effects, right? So, for example, right, does everybody here know the drug Humira?
I've heard of it.
Yes.
Heard of it. I think I may have seen some commercials.
It's one of the arthritis anti-inflammatory drugs that's on the market right now. And it's been out since 2003, right? So it's been out about 18 years. Because it is for chronic and long-term inflammatory conditions, it could be that after 20 years, we see some negative effects, right? But for these 17, 18 years that it's been out, it has been providing good clinical results to people, right? And that is how we in the United States, and how most, I think all regulatory agencies work, right? If they can prove good clinical effects and don't see any red flags for negative clinical effects, drugs are approved, right? That's how medicine works, right? And so, yeah.
It doesn't make sense to test something for 20 years so that you can know what happens with the drug after 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, especially, and especially you have to weigh that against how many people are dead and are going to die before they can get this vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, that's 20 years of your life, I guess, added, where you're not dead from COVID, at least before detrimental side effects show. Quick question. So we've talked about the testing in regard to, so we're looking at pretty much like 2021 before we can even start to get back to normal. And that's if all the children can be inoculated. Yeah. But we talked about testing this across the board, women, children, what have there been any results for specific demographics racially? Are we seeing a difference in regard to how this vaccine operates in minority populations at all?
We haven't. Yeah, so we haven't. There hasn't been that reported. This was actually a problem in recruiting for clinical trials because in clinical trials in general, it's populations that are generally underrepresented in clinical trials are women and people of color, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that I first got involved with in 2010. I started.
That's understandable, right? That's understandable. Yeah. You know why? I mean, we got Tuskegee experiments.
It's It's
He beat me to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and with good reason, right? But this is something that I became aware of very, very much in a real fashion when I first encountered it in research projects back in 2010. And it's something that has been, you know, for decades now. Certain researchers have been pushing, you know, as we move in clinical trials, we need to get these diverse populations because we need to know how these drugs operate. Now, yeah, as of right now, we haven't seen detrimental effects in different ethnicities, but at the same time, those ethnicities were underrepresented in the majority of clinical trials.
Okay. So
Yeah.
basically, by those populations, you know, choosing not to participate, they're basically increasing the likelihood of, or decreasing the amount of data that's available for us to operate off of. So
yeah,
it's kind of a catch-22. You don't take it.
It is.
You know, you don't take it, and you don't, you know, get the data you need to make an informed decision. You know, but you do take it, and you do have the chance of, you know, being exploited, I guess, like medically.
Yeah.
I've
So
got
how do you
another
think-
question for you, if you don't mind, Brandon, just quickly. We obviously just a couple of questions ago, we were getting a little animated about how poorly the White House dealt with the entire process. What I'm concerned with is there still a political football to be thrown about in the distribution of this in terms of red states and blue states? Is that a possibility that could happen?
It's a possibility. Like I said, I'm not ruling anything out. Given how badly we've seen the federal government handle this at every step up to this point, it's a very real possibility. And it is a terrible possibility, and it is an inhuman possibility, and it is a possibility that does nothing but maximize suffering. But it's a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. Given what we've seen, given the type of cruelty that we've seen from this administration, given the type of anti-science dogma from this administration, I'm not going to rule it out.
Yeah, that's probably the scariest point of everything, unfortunately.
Last question, Brandon.
What's up?
I want to ask this question. As you as a doctor, right? We might not be able to get this vaccine into the summertime. So that's 6 months, the worst, the proper treatments that we need. As a doctor, is anything that you would take to keep your immune system up through this time? Besides vitamin C, vitamin D, like if you say, all right, I'm gonna take, I don't know what you're taking at night, but you dealing with people that got corona or whatever. Is this steps that you're taking to give us a head up to say, let's start keeping our immune system up by taking these 3 proper things?
Yeah. So what I'm going to say is, for the majority of people in Western advanced nations, the vitamins that you're getting in kind of your everyday diet. So what we've seen in some clinical that are depleted, zinc depleted, to the point where it would cause problems even if they didn't get coronavirus. Yes, when they get coronavirus, it's much more severe. However, for people in the United States, most people in the United States, most people in what we would call advanced or wealthy countries, we're not really at risk, right? So you could take vitamin C if it makes you feel better. You could take vitamin D if it makes you feel better, but it's really not going to help you in the long run, because you're getting plenty of vitamin D from your milk. You're getting plenty of vitamin C from the fruit that you're eating. If you are severely depleted of these vitamins, yeah, you're gonna have much worse health outcomes. But you're gonna have much worse health outcomes for everything, not just coronavirus. As far as supplements, over-the-counter things, no. I mean, I don't think there's anything that has really been shown to really decrease the ability of us to get infected. For a while, everyone was talking about hydroxychloroquine. Everyone was talking about zinc. But those things really have not been shown to have any effect on either the length or the severity or the the ability of a person to get infected.
Is there anything? We have a question in the chat. Is there any evidence of nicotine blocking COVID receptors, or even cannabis blocking COVID receptors? I mean, I've heard some of those rumors as well.
Yeah, yeah, those things are they're actually being investigated. They're in clinical trials right now. As far as the nicotine in nicotine preventing COVID-19, there's a solid theory behind that. So they're actually currently recruiting people to see if people that use nicotine are more immune to the coronavirus. There's a good molecular reasoning behind that. Basically, the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are they co-populate with the ACE2 receptors, and it's a possibility that it might block. But it's being investigated right now, and I know that different cannabinoids are being investigated as well. But that data is not available. But it is being investigated, right? So the thing about coronavirus is that basically everything is being investigated. So it could be, it's very possible, but we don't have that data.
Okay, so people should smoke cigarettes, smoke weed.
I was going to say,
make sure you stay obese. So whatever you're up, you can get that first. You can get the vaccine first. So smoke cigarettes, smoke weed, stay chunky, and we'll be good.
Well, I was going to say that tequila makes me feel better. Can I take that? When I go to explain how the vaccine works to people, I'm going to tell them that the spike is the coronavirus of beer, and the vaccine is the lemon wedge.
Gotcha.
So, do we have any more questions coming from the peanut gallery?
I don't see any right now on the chat. And Darnell, have you got your fill of knowledge?
Yeah, you answered my questions.
Okay.
I'm glad I could.
This has been great. This has been so insightful, and I think this is exactly what people need, just to, especially at the end of the year that seemed like 45 years. It's just been one onslaught of one thing after another, and it's been there's a little bit of a light, I guess, at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, yeah.
One final question. What are your thoughts about this being mandatory?
That's a very good question, right? That's an incredibly good question. And here's what I'm going to say. I don't know if it's ever going to be a mandatory thing, because the population of kind of anti-vaxxers that have the ability to turn violent is so large within our country. However, what I'm going to say is what's probably going to happen is that there will be multiple different incentives for people to get the vaccine. And I don't mean government incentives, right? Because there was some early on talk of tying it to a second stimulus check or something like that. No, I don't think that's what's going to happen, because honestly, our government decided it's more important for Bezos to be a trillionaire. So what I think is probably going to happen is something like this, right? Your job is going to say, okay, everybody has to have the COVID vaccine. Mm-hmm. I live in Illinois. Most people in the United States live in what's called at-will states, meaning that you can get fired for any reason or no reason, right? So you wouldn't specifically be fired because you didn't get the vaccine, but if you didn't get the vaccine, you might get fired. If you want to join a gym, they might say, listen, we accept everybody, but you have to have the COVID vaccine, right? Mm-hmm. I was actually just listening to something from the head of the flight attendants union for United Airlines. And they are pushing to make it so that if you want to fly on United, you got to have the vaccine, right? Oh, wow. These are not government mandates. These are private companies saying, hey, we care so much about the safety of our customers and the safety of our employees. You got to get this vaccine, right? That's what I think is much more likely to happen, right? Is not the government, not Big Brother coming in and saying, you got to do this, otherwise you're going to go to jail. I think it's much more likely to be several small incentives and pressures that are going to be put on people to take this vaccine.
I think I just recently saw that there was 2 different studies done where they asked people if they would take the vaccine, and there was a certain percentage. And then they asked them if they would take the vaccine if it was mandated, if it was mandatory. And the percentage that said yes went down. Right. So basically, it's Americans saying, well, you can't tell me what to do, you know. So I think that if you're going to make it mandatory, I think you're just asking for trouble, right?
First rule of vaccines is don't talk about vaccines. Gotcha. Well, thank you for being with us tonight, Dylan, and thank everybody who contributed to the discussion. Darnell, Andy, everybody in our chat. I'm getting messages from Carrie that we need to wrap this up. But yeah, we are just 4 months into this, being rolled out. So we're going to definitely have to have you back so we can follow up and see how things are playing out as far as distribution and affected communities. This is a rolling discussion in my opinion, but thank you for your time and for being here tonight, Dylan.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and yeah, have me back. Just shoot me an invite and I will come back and talk about this. I can talk about this for days. It's what I do.
Awesome. Digital Liberation Front. We are done. Andy, do you have anything else you want to say on the way out?
No, I'm good. I am been thinking about a shot of tequila though.
That would be nice.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. Thank you, Darnell, and thanks so much, Dylan. It was a great conversation, and hopefully we've eased some people's fears out there. All right, everybody. Take care.